Michael Thompson adjusted his seat belt as he and his 10-year-old son, David, prepared to take off from O'Hare International Airport. The flight to New York was supposed to be a fun escape from their busy lives, a chance for father and son to spend some time together before school and work filled their days with routine again. David had been bubbling with excitement all week, talking endlessly about the tall buildings, bright lights, and the museum exhibits he wanted to see. Michael watched his son's face light up with every word, remembering how much he had loved flying as a boy himself. It was supposed to be a normal, happy day, a father-son adventure, but as the plane hummed and passengers settled into their seats, Michael felt a tension creeping in that he had not expected. A young flight attendant approached them with a clipboard, her expression polite but firm. "Sir," she said, "your child needs to switch seats." This seat was assigned to another passenger. David looked up at his father with wide, confused eyes. "Why?" he asked softly, his small hands clutching the armrest. Michael's stomach sank, and a wave of anger and disbelief washed over him. He had faced countless challenges in his life, navigating corporate boardrooms and negotiating high-stakes deals, but nothing compared to the helpless feeling he had when his son, innocent and full of curiosity, was being singled out and asked to give up his place for reasons that made no sense to him. He straightened in his seat, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "Excuse me, could you please explain why my son has to move?" The flight attendant repeated, almost mechanically, "This seat is needed. Your son must switch." Michael noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the way she avoided his eyes, but he refused to let it intimidate him. He placed a firm hand on David's shoulder. "We booked this seat. He will not move. You may need to speak to your supervisor before making this demand." David's small fingers curled around his father's hand, seeking reassurance. He had been taught by his father to trust him, but even children have limits to their understanding, and David's eyes reflected a mix of confusion and fear. Around them, the murmur of other passengers began to rise. Some glanced with curiosity, others with disapproval, but Michael blocked them out. His focus was on David, on making sure his son felt safe, seen, and protected. A few minutes later, the supervisor arrived, a middle-aged man with a professional demeanor that seemed, at first, neutral. He explained that the seat had indeed been reserved for another passenger and that airline policy required children to give way when necessary. Michael listened patiently, but his jaw tightened as he felt a familiar surge of determination. He had spent years building a reputation on integrity and fairness, and he could not, would not, let someone treat his son unjustly. "Sir," he said calmly but firmly, "this is not about policy. My son has a right to this seat. He has a ticket, he booked it, and no one will make him move because of how he looks. You may want to reconsider your instructions before you enforce them." The supervisor paused, glancing at the flight attendant, and Michael could see the hesitation flicker across both of their faces. David squeezed his father's hand, silently asking if he was doing the right thing. Michael smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of pride and sorrow. He knew this lesson was important, perhaps one of the first that David would carry with him for the rest of his life, that standing up for oneself and for what is right sometimes comes with discomfort but always comes with dignity. The murmurs from nearby passengers grew louder. Some offered quiet nods of support, while others frowned, clearly unsure of what was happening. Michael ignored the whispers. He was not there to appease strangers, he was there to protect his son and show him how to respond to unfairness with courage and composure. He could feel the tension in the cabin, the way the flight attendant's posture stiffened, how the supervisor's voice slightly wavered as he repeated the request. Michael did not back down. "My son is not moving," he said. "If you have an issue, call your higher management or report this properly, but do not treat my child as if he has no right to be here." Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Some passengers leaned forward to listen, sensing the gravity of the situation. David's eyes were fixed on his father, absorbing every word, learning about resilience and self-respect in real time. Michael's mind flashed back to his own childhood, the times he had been underestimated or overlooked, and he felt a deep empathy for his son, mixed with a resolve that burned hotter than ever. He thought of all the lessons he had promised to teach David, not just about school or manners, but about life, fairness, courage, and dignity. This was the moment where all of those lessons converged. He would not let fear, discomfort, or social pressure dictate how his son was treated. He took a deep breath and continued. "We will not move. My son has a ticket and a right to this seat. That is final. You will need to respect that." The supervisor opened his mouth, perhaps to argue further, but hesitated. Michael noticed the subtle shift in the cabin, the way other passengers seemed to sense that a stand was being taken, not aggressively, but firmly and ethically. David's hand felt warm and steady in his own, and for a moment, Michael saw a flicker of pride in the boy's eyes, mixed with relief that he was not alone. The plane continued to hum softly as engines ran, passengers settled into seats, and Michael felt the weight of the moment. It was more than a seating issue, it was about respect, about recognition of dignity, about the lesson his son would carry for life. He thought of the world David would grow into, the obstacles he might face, and the importance of showing him that courage and calm determination were powerful tools, far stronger than shouting or confrontation. In that tense, quiet moment, father and son shared a connection that was deeper than words. Michael's gaze swept the cabin, noting the reactions of those around him. Some offered subtle smiles, others looked away, but he did not care. His focus remained on David, on the lesson being imparted, on the principle that fairness and justice must be upheld, no matter the setting. He could almost feel the story of this flight reaching beyond the airplane walls, a small ripple in a larger world that often overlooked dignity and respect. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Michael placed a reassuring hand on David's shoulder and whispered, "You are brave, and you are right where you belong." David looked at him and smiled, a mixture of pride and relief lighting his face. Michael knew that the flight ahead would be more than just a journey through the clouds, it would be a journey into the understanding of justice, courage, and the quiet but firm power of standing for what is right. The plane lifted into the sky, leaving behind the city and the tension, but carrying with it the lesson that neither fear nor unfairness could dictate the path of those who believed in integrity. Michael held David's hand, feeling the boy's heartbeat next to his own, and in that moment, he vowed that no matter what challenges arose in life, he would always stand by his son, guiding him, protecting him, and teaching him the meaning of courage in its truest form. As the plane leveled off and the city below disappeared into a blanket of clouds, Michael Thompson's mind raced with the events that had just unfolded. He watched David press his face to the window, tracing the edges of the clouds with his small fingers, but he knew that the boy's thoughts were still swirling with confusion about the confrontation. Michael wanted to shield him from the weight of unfairness, yet he also understood that this moment could teach an important lesson about courage and self-respect. He gently squeezed David's hand and said, "Remember, son, sometimes people make choices that are not fair, but we must always stand for what is right. That is how we protect ourselves and help others." David looked up at him, his eyes wide and shining with admiration and curiosity, and Michael felt a surge of pride. The flight attendant, whose earlier insistence had sparked the tension, walked by with a polite but forced smile, clearly aware of the shift in the cabin atmosphere. Michael did not take his eyes off her. He wanted her to understand that David had done nothing wrong, and that the right action now was acknowledgement and respect, not apology driven by fear. As the minutes passed, Michael noticed subtle gestures from other passengers, a gentle nod from a mother across the aisle, a quiet smile from a man reading a newspaper, small signs that people were silently supporting the idea that fairness mattered, even in the confined space of an airplane cabin. Michael's thoughts drifted to the lessons he wanted David to carry into the future, lessons about dignity, strength, and the courage to face unfairness calmly but firmly. He recalled his own experiences, moments when he had been underestimated because of his background or the color of his skin, and he recognized the importance of showing David that perseverance and self-respect could overcome even the most uncomfortable situations. "Dad," David asked softly, breaking into his thoughts, "are they mad at us?" Michael smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from his son's forehead. "Some may be upset, but we are doing the right thing. That is what matters most. Sometimes, people will not understand fairness or justice immediately, but you must never forget who you are or what you deserve." David nodded, leaning back in his seat, yet he remained alert, clearly absorbing the gravity of the moment. Michael could see the pride building in him, tempered by the natural nervousness of a child confronted with authority. He wanted David to understand that standing up for oneself did not require anger or aggression, only clarity, calmness, and confidence in one's own worth. As the flight continued, the supervisor approached them again, this time with a more measured tone. "Sir, we appreciate your patience. We will honor your son's seat for the remainder of the flight," he said, his words carrying a mix of relief and awkwardness. Michael nodded, maintaining his composed demeanor. "Thank you. We simply ask that our rights and dignity be respected at all times," he replied. David let out a quiet sigh of relief, his small shoulders relaxing, but Michael knew the impact of the situation would linger far beyond the flight. The boy had witnessed a stand against unfair treatment, a demonstration of moral courage that Michael hoped would shape him for years to come. He turned his attention back to the window, looking at the sprawling landscape below and the endless sky above, reflecting on how such moments, though challenging, often became the most defining. The flight attendant passed by once more, giving a curt nod this time, as if acknowledging her mistake without openly admitting it. Michael did not engage with her further, knowing that the lesson for David was not revenge or confrontation but awareness and justice. Around them, the hum of the airplane created a steady rhythm, a backdrop to the intense emotions and quiet triumphs unfolding within their small section of the cabin. Michael thought about the ripple effect of standing up for what was right, not just for David, but for everyone who might one day find themselves in a similar situation. The courage to insist on fairness, to calmly demand respect, could inspire others, he realized, creating a world where dignity mattered more than fear or discomfort. He gently squeezed David's hand again and whispered, "You were very brave, son. I am proud of you." David's lips curved into a small smile, the weight of fear replaced by the warmth of validation. Michael knew that this moment would become a cornerstone memory in David's life, a reference point for all the challenges he would face in the years ahead. He also reflected on the role of responsibility, recognizing that his own actions had consequences far beyond this flight. By standing firm, he was not only protecting his son but also teaching him how to navigate a world that often tested fairness and justice. The clouds outside began to take on a golden hue as the sun moved across the sky, casting warm light across the cabin. Michael's mind wandered to the people they would meet in New York, the experiences awaiting them, and the stories they would carry home. Yet he knew that the lesson of the flight, the lesson of courage, integrity, and respect would remain the most vivid part of the trip. He considered the broader context of the situation, how systemic issues sometimes manifested in small, personal encounters, and he felt a sense of responsibility to ensure that David understood these realities without letting them diminish his confidence or joy. Michael's internal reflection was interrupted by a soft question from David. "Dad, will people always be fair?" The boy's innocence and sincerity struck him deeply. Michael smiled gently, choosing his words with care. "Not always, son. But that does not mean you stop believing in fairness or stop standing up for yourself. You always do what is right, and you treat others with respect, even if they do not return it. That is the true measure of strength." David absorbed this, nodding slowly, and Michael felt a surge of hope. He realized that while the world could be unjust, moments like these when courage and dignity triumphed offered the chance to shape not only one's own character but also the character of those who witnessed it. As the plane continued over endless stretches of clouds, Michael noticed that the tension in the cabin had eased. Passengers seemed more relaxed, some glancing at him and David with quiet approval, others returning to their own routines with subdued smiles. He recognized the subtle shifts in energy, understanding that even small actions could influence the atmosphere around them, fostering awareness and empathy. Michael's thoughts returned to his own father, the lessons passed down to him about respect, fairness, and resilience. He felt grateful that he could now pass these same values to David, guiding him through one of the earliest and most formative experiences of his life. He imagined the conversations they would have after the flight, the reflections, the stories that David would recount to friends, and the sense of empowerment that would grow within the boy. Michael knew that life would not always be easy, that unfair situations would arise again and again, but he felt confident that David had begun to understand the importance of standing firm, of asserting one's rights without resorting to anger, and of maintaining dignity even when challenged. The hum of the engines, the rhythmic movement of the plane, and the soft chatter of other passengers became a background to a quiet but powerful bond forming between father and son. Michael's eyes occasionally met David's, sharing a silent acknowledgement of the strength they had both displayed. The lesson was not abstract, it was lived, immediate, and deeply personal. He allowed himself a small smile as he realized that David's pride and understanding were growing with each passing moment, that the boy's courage was no longer theoretical but experienced firsthand. Michael also understood that this incident could be the start of something larger, a catalyst for awareness about fairness, respect, and moral courage. He imagined how one simple act of standing firm could ripple outward, inspiring conversations, reflections, and perhaps even changes in attitudes. But for now, the focus was simple: protect David, validate his feelings, and reinforce the principles that mattered most. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows in the cabin as the plane cruised steadily. Michael continued to hold David's hand, feeling the warmth, the rhythm, and the unspoken gratitude from the boy. This simple connection, a gesture of reassurance and love, carried more weight than any words or actions could express. He knew that in the months and years to come, David would remember this flight not for the discomfort or tension but for the courage they displayed together, the integrity they upheld, and the quiet triumph of standing firm in the face of unfairness. Michael allowed himself a moment of reflection, recognizing that life's most important lessons often came in unexpected packages, in ordinary settings that became extraordinary through the choices we make. And as the plane soared above the clouds, father and son shared a profound understanding, a silent but unbreakable bond forged in a small cabin that would echo throughout their lives, reminding them always of the power of courage, dignity, and the quiet strength of standing up for what is right. The flight finally touched down at New York's airport, and Michael Thompson felt a mix of relief and anticipation as the wheels hit the tarmac. David's eyes sparkled with excitement, forgetting for a moment the tension of the flight, but Michael knew the experience had left a lasting impression on him. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, Michael could feel the curiosity and attention of other passengers lingering in the cabin. Many had witnessed the earlier confrontation, and while some had whispered disapproval, others had clearly admired the calm courage he had shown. Michael remained composed, guiding David through the aisle with a protective hand on his shoulder, aware of the weight of the lessons he had taught his son during the flight. The airport was bustling with travelers, families, and business people, yet Michael's mind was focused on the next steps. He knew that simply standing firm on the plane was not enough. The behavior of the airline staff needed accountability to prevent similar situations for other passengers in the future. After they exited the plane and walked toward the baggage claim area, Michael used his phone to contact the airline's headquarters. He explained the situation carefully, describing the interaction with the flight crew, the unfair treatment of his son, and the refusal to respect their rightful seat. The representative on the other end listened politely, but Michael could sense hesitation, the same reluctance to confront the issue that had been present on the flight. "I expect a formal response and an investigation," he said firmly, his voice calm yet resolute. "This is not simply about a seat on a plane. It is about respect, fairness, and the way families and children should be treated. I want to see action, not just words." David walked beside him, holding his father's hand tightly, watching him speak with confidence and authority. The boy's admiration was evident, and Michael felt proud that he had been able to model strength and composure in such a challenging situation. As they moved through the terminal, Michael noticed people glancing at them, some with recognition, others with curiosity, and he realized that the small incident on the plane had already begun to ripple outward. Social media, he would later learn, had captured the event through photos and stories shared by passengers, and the narrative of a father standing up for his child was spreading quickly. Yet Michael remained focused on the present moment, on making sure David felt safe and validated, and on ensuring that justice was pursued appropriately. They retrieved their luggage and stepped into the bustling streets of New York, the noise and energy of the city surrounding them, but Michael's thoughts remained anchored to the events of the flight. He wanted to turn this uncomfortable experience into something positive, a way to inspire change and teach his son about the importance of speaking up when faced with injustice. In the following days, Michael worked closely with the airline's corporate office, providing detailed accounts, emails, and statements from passengers who had witnessed the incident. The process was tedious and frustrating at times, but Michael knew that perseverance was essential. He wanted the airline to understand that children deserved respect and that parents should never feel powerless in protecting them. David observed the process with interest, occasionally asking questions about what would happen next, and Michael took the time to explain in simple terms the importance of accountability, fairness, and persistence. "It's not about being mean to anyone, son," he said one evening, sitting together in their hotel room. "It's about making sure that everyone understands that unfair treatment is not acceptable and that standing up for what is right matters, even if it is difficult." David nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the lesson with a seriousness that surprised Michael. He realized that his son was learning early that courage and morality were not abstract ideas but lived experiences, lessons that required action and integrity. As the days passed, Michael continued to navigate the formal complaints process, speaking with airline executives, presenting evidence, and insisting on corrective measures. The airline acknowledged their error and promised sensitivity training for staff, a clear sign that the efforts of one determined parent could spark change beyond a single incident. Michael felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his persistence had not only protected his son but had also created a safer environment for other families. Throughout the ordeal, he remained conscious of the emotional impact on David, taking time each evening to talk about what had happened, reinforcing the importance of confidence, fairness, and respect. They visited museums, parks, and famous landmarks, and yet the memory of the flight and the lessons it carried remained central to their conversations. David often reflected aloud, asking questions about right and wrong, fairness, and courage, and Michael answered with patience, honesty, and examples from his own life. Sometimes, people make mistakes or act without thinking, he explained one afternoon while they strolled through Central Park. Our job is not to respond with anger but to respond with fairness and courage. That is how we make a difference. David smiled, understanding more than he could fully express, and Michael felt that the experiences of the flight were becoming a cornerstone of his son's moral development. Beyond the immediate incident, Michael recognized the broader significance of the events. The story had already begun to circulate on social media and in news outlets, sparking discussions about fairness, respect, and the treatment of families in public spaces. Michael did not seek attention or recognition, but he understood that their actions had contributed to an important conversation, one that could have lasting effects for many people. David, witnessing his father navigate both the practical and ethical aspects of the situation, learned about resilience, patience, and the impact of deliberate action. Michael made sure to balance the emotional weight of the incident with moments of joy, laughter, and discovery throughout their trip, helping his son connect lessons of morality with everyday experiences. Together, they explored the city, visited museums, and walked through streets filled with people from every walk of life. Michael pointed out how differences could exist in harmony and how empathy and respect were essential to understanding others. Yet he also reminded David that standing up for what is right was never optional, even when it was uncomfortable or challenging. As the trip came to an end, Michael reflected on the journey from O'Hare to New York, realizing that the events of the flight had become more than a story about seats or airline policies. They had become a lesson in life, courage, and character. He watched David, now more confident, more aware, and more understanding of the world's complexities, and he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The experience had bonded them in a unique way, creating a shared memory that carried both emotion and wisdom. Michael understood that as David grew, he would encounter other challenges, other situations requiring moral courage and clarity, and he felt prepared to guide him through those experiences with the same calm determination he had displayed on the flight. The return journey would be quieter, less tense, but Michael knew that the lessons from this trip would resonate far beyond the clouds and airports, embedding themselves in his son's understanding of justice, respect, and personal integrity. The incident had sparked reflection not only for Michael and David but also for the airline, the passengers, and anyone who had witnessed the story unfold. It became a reminder that courage and dignity could ripple outward, influencing others, shaping conversations, and inspiring action. Michael felt grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate these values to his son, to show him that standing firm in the face of unfairness was not only possible but necessary. And as he watched David laugh at a small joke during one of their sightseeing adventures, he realized that the boy had absorbed much more than a lesson about a seat on a plane. He had learned about respect, fairness, moral courage, and the quiet power of integrity. The city, vibrant and full of life, became a backdrop to these lessons, a canvas where father and son painted a story of resilience, dignity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Michael knew that long after they returned home, the memory of this trip, the challenges they faced, and the lessons learned would remain with David, shaping his character, guiding his decisions, and inspiring him to live with courage and fairness every day. and in that understanding, Michael found not only pride but a profound sense of purpose, knowing that the values he cherished and fought to protect were now part of his son's foundation, ready to guide him through the complexities and opportunities of life ahead. As Michael Thompson and David continued their stay in New York, the story of the flight began to gain attention beyond just the passengers who had witnessed it. Social media posts from other travelers had gone viral, showing images of Michael calmly standing by his son and refusing to move him from his seat. The posts highlighted not only the courage of a father protecting his child but also the unfairness that had sparked the confrontation, drawing the attention of local news outlets and bloggers who wanted to know more about the incident. Michael knew that the attention was growing and that the story could have a meaningful impact if handled carefully. He continued to communicate with the airline's corporate office, providing more details, submitting statements from passengers who had supported him and his son, and emphasizing the need for accountability and meaningful change. The airline responded with formal apologies, and executives promised to implement sensitivity training for staff members to prevent similar situations in the future. Michael appreciated the gesture, but he knew that true change would take more than words. It required consistent action, monitoring, and a clear message that discrimination or unfair treatment of any kind was unacceptable. Meanwhile, David was both fascinated and proud of how their story was spreading. He watched clips of news reports on television in their hotel room, seeing images of himself with his father and hearing words of support and encouragement from people they had never met. Michael took the opportunity to talk to David about the power of standing up for oneself and the responsibility that comes with making a difference. "Son," he said one evening, "sometimes when we face unfairness, we have a choice. We can ignore it, or we can respond with calm courage. Our choice can inspire others and even change rules so that everyone is treated better." David listened intently, his eyes wide, absorbing every word. He began to understand that their small act on the plane was not just about a seat, it was about respect, fairness, and teaching others that courage mattered more than compliance. As they explored the city, Michael noticed that people recognized him and David in subtle ways: friendly nods, quiet smiles, and sometimes words of encouragement from strangers who had read or heard about their story. These small gestures reminded Michael that standing up for what was right could resonate far beyond the immediate situation, reaching people who might feel powerless themselves. Each time David asked questions about why some people had acted unfairly or why it had become such a big story, Michael explained in simple terms, helping his son navigate complex ideas without frightening or overwhelming him. He emphasized that standing for fairness was not about anger or revenge but about respect, dignity, and ensuring that no one else experienced the same unfair treatment. Michael also continued to involve David in the follow-up process with the airline, showing him how adults could communicate effectively, assert their rights, and request meaningful change without losing composure. Together, they drafted polite but firm letters, responded to inquiries, and shared their perspective in a way that reinforced integrity, honesty, and professionalism. Michael realized that these actions were shaping David's character in ways that classroom lessons or books could not. The boy was learning firsthand about responsibility, leadership, and moral courage. In addition to working with the airline, Michael also took time to reflect on the broader impact of their experience. He spoke with colleagues, friends, and family about the importance of fairness, especially for children, and considered how he could use his position and influence as a CEO to advocate for better practices and policies that protected families and upheld dignity in public spaces. David listened to these conversations and asked thoughtful questions, demonstrating a growing awareness of the world and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. Michael encouraged him to express his thoughts and feelings, reinforcing that courage included honesty and reflection, not just assertive actions. The days passed quickly as father and son balanced sightseeing and recreation with the ongoing follow-up on the flight incident. They visited museums, walked through bustling streets, and enjoyed small moments of joy, yet the story of their stand remained in the background, a constant reminder of the importance of integrity and moral courage. Michael felt proud to see how David carried himself with confidence, how he interacted with people politely yet firmly, and how he was beginning to understand that fairness and respect were essential values to uphold throughout life. The airline continued to communicate with Michael, providing updates on their training programs, internal reviews, and steps taken to ensure that their staff would not repeat such mistakes. Michael recognized that this process could serve as a model for other organizations, showing how one determined parent could influence policies and promote accountability. He also realized that the story could inspire countless others to act with courage and fairness, creating a ripple effect far beyond their individual experience. At the same time, Michael made sure to protect David from being overwhelmed by media attention or public scrutiny, guiding him gently and emphasizing the positive lessons rather than focusing on negativity or conflict. He encouraged his son to see the bigger picture, to understand that while unfairness existed in the world, the power to respond with integrity and dignity could make a difference not only for themselves but for others as well. Together, they reflected on the experience, discussing what they had learned and how it might guide their future actions. Michael reinforced the idea that courage was not loud or aggressive but calm, principled, and consistent, and David absorbed this wisdom with a quiet determination. By the end of their trip, the airline had implemented new training programs, communicated apologies to all parties involved, and expressed a commitment to fostering a culture of respect and fairness for all passengers. Michael felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that their actions had led to tangible change, and he shared this sense of pride with David, emphasizing that standing up for what is right could create positive outcomes, even in situations that initially seemed small or isolated. The father and son returned home with memories of both challenge and triumph, their bond strengthened by the experience and the lessons it carried. Michael reflected on how the flight had become a turning point, not just for David, but for himself as well, reminding him of the power of calm courage, clear communication, and unwavering integrity. David, inspired by the events, began to speak more confidently about fairness and respect in his own interactions, applying the lessons learned in practical ways at school and in social settings. Michael watched with quiet pride as his son internalized these values, understanding that the experience had provided more than a story to tell. It had become a foundation for character, resilience, and lifelong courage. In the months that followed, Michael continued to advocate for fairness and accountability, sharing their story with colleagues and industry leaders, emphasizing the importance of respect and dignity in all interactions. David continued to reflect on the experience, understanding that courage and integrity were not just abstract ideals but practical tools for navigating life, relationships, and the challenges of the world around him. The impact of their actions extended beyond the immediate circumstances, creating awareness, inspiring dialogue, and fostering empathy in ways that Michael had hoped for but had not fully imagined. The experience had transformed a simple flight into a profound lesson about moral courage, fairness, and the strength of character, and Michael knew that these lessons would continue to shape their lives for years to come. As they looked back on the journey together, father and son shared a quiet understanding of the power of integrity, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the value of compassion, reflection, and deliberate action in creating meaningful change in the world around them. After returning home from New York, Michael Thompson noticed subtle changes in David that reflected the deep lessons the flight had taught him. The boy walked with a quiet confidence, no longer hesitant in new situations or uncertain about speaking up when something felt unfair. Michael watched him at breakfast one morning, observing the way David politely yet firmly asked for what he needed without fear or anger, and he felt a swell of pride that went beyond words. The experience on the flight, which had initially caused stress and tension, now seemed like a foundation for growth, a turning point that had shaped David's understanding of fairness, courage, and integrity. Michael continued to guide him, sharing stories from his own life, examples of people who had stood for what was right, and situations in which calm courage had made a difference. "Son," he said one afternoon while helping David with a school project, "remember that life will sometimes challenge you unfairly. People may not always understand or act justly, but how you respond matters more than their actions. You can always choose to act with respect, fairness, and courage." David nodded thoughtfully, absorbing each word, and Michael realized that these lessons were becoming a part of his son's character, shaping him in ways that would last a lifetime. The story of the flight, meanwhile, continued to resonate beyond their immediate circle. Articles, social media posts, and discussions about the incident emphasized the importance of respect and equality, showing how one small act of standing firm could inspire dialogue and reflection on a much larger scale. Michael received messages from strangers thanking him for demonstrating courage, from parents who wanted their children to learn from the example, and even from people who admitted that they had not realized how often subtle unfairness could affect families and children. He shared these responses with David, explaining how positive change often began with small actions that set an example for others. David listened with fascination, seeing that their choice to stand for fairness had consequences far beyond what he could immediately understand, and he began to feel a sense of responsibility for his own actions and decisions. As the weeks passed, Michael continued to reinforce the lessons of the flight in everyday life. He encouraged David to express himself, to question unfairness respectfully, and to observe how others treated people with care and dignity. He emphasized that courage was not about shouting or confronting with anger, but about staying calm, clear, and firm, no matter the pressure. David practiced this in school, at home, and in social situations, gaining a quiet strength that impressed Michael and reassured him that the lessons would endure. Michael also reflected on the broader implications of the incident. He considered how everyday actions, small decisions made in moments of discomfort or uncertainty could ripple outward, influencing culture, behavior, and perceptions of fairness. The airline's implementation of sensitivity training, prompted by their experience, was just one example of how standing for integrity could have a real-world impact. Michael knew that there were countless situations in life where courage, fairness, and dignity would be tested, and he was confident that David was now equipped to face them with confidence, understanding, and a strong moral compass. Over time, father and son continued to explore new experiences together, traveling to museums, parks, and cultural events, always discussing the values they were learning and observing in the world around them. Michael made sure that the lessons from the flight remained present, not as a burden or source of anxiety, but as a guide for decision-making, character development, and social interaction. He noticed that David had begun to mentor younger children at school, quietly showing them the importance of standing up for themselves and treating others with respect. Michael felt a sense of fulfillment, realizing that the impact of their actions on the flight had extended far beyond the immediate moment, inspiring empathy, reflection, and courage in others. As the months continued, Michael often reflected on the flight in quiet moments, thinking about how a simple incident could transform understanding, behavior, and relationships. He felt grateful that he had remained calm, firm, and principled, knowing that his example had shaped David's growth in ways that would last a lifetime. David, too, carried the lessons forward, occasionally recalling the flight when facing challenges at school or in social settings, remembering the feeling of support and guidance from his father, and learning that standing for fairness could feel empowering rather than frightening. Michael continued to emphasize the importance of perspective, empathy, and deliberate action, teaching David that courage and integrity were not only about defending oneself but also about creating an environment where others could feel safe, valued, and respected. Their bond grew stronger with each shared experience, strengthened by the understanding that they had faced unfairness together and had chosen to respond with clarity, dignity, and moral courage. Michael also recognized that their experience had a lasting impact on the airline and other families who witnessed the story, showing that accountability, sensitivity, and fairness were not abstract ideals but practical requirements in real-life situations. The changes implemented by the airline were a testament to the fact that even small acts of courage and advocacy could produce meaningful outcomes, reinforcing the idea that standing for what is right was always worth the effort. David began to internalize the principles even more deeply, noticing situations in his school and community where fairness could be upheld and practicing calm, confident responses, always remembering the way his father had handled the flight incident. Michael's quiet pride in his son grew daily as he watched him navigate life with a newfound sense of responsibility, empathy, and courage. One evening, as they sat together looking out at the city skyline from their apartment window, Michael reflected on how much had changed since that flight. What had begun as a stressful and uncomfortable experience had become a defining moment, shaping David's character, influencing their community, and providing a story that illustrated the importance of standing up for what is right. He squeezed David's hand gently and said, "Remember, son, the choices we make in difficult moments define us more than anything else. Always be brave, always be fair, and always be kind, no matter what others do." David smiled, feeling both pride and clarity, understanding that these were not just words but a guide for life. The story of their flight, once a moment of tension, had become a source of inspiration, teaching lessons that extended far beyond the airplane, the airport, or even their city. It was a story about courage, integrity, and the power of moral action, and it was now part of David's identity. Michael felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had not only protected his son in a moment of injustice but had also equipped him with the tools, confidence, and understanding to navigate life with strength and dignity. Together, father and son continued to live, explore, and learn, carrying the lessons of the flight forward, a permanent part of their bond and a foundation for the life that lay ahead. Every decision, every interaction, every challenge became an opportunity to practice the values they had embraced, and Michael knew that David would grow into a young man who understood the importance of fairness, respect, and courage in all circumstances. The city, the world, and life itself seemed a little brighter, a little more manageable, knowing that even small acts of moral courage could ripple outward, inspiring others and creating a legacy of integrity that would last far beyond their immediate experience. And as Michael watched David drift off to sleep each night, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that the lessons of that flight, the courage to stand firm, the importance of fairness, and the power of integrity would remain with his son forever, guiding him through life with strength, wisdom, and heart.